I want to emphasize, Sunday was Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. And so many people in this state and country rightfully showed appreciation and gratitude for our law enforcement officers. But the fact of the matter is, showing our gratitude for one day a year is inadequate for what we need to do. All of these officials, as well as men and women who work under them, they put their lives on the line every single day, answering calls, not knowing whether or not they're ever going to return home after answering that call. Some never returning home after answering that call. As a result, we need officials who are going to step up and have the back of our law enforcement officers. And one thing I know these sheriffs and other law enforcement officers know, they have a governor who has their back, period. So one thing that we did was to defund any city that defunds police, and appropriately so, the city of Austin immediately began refunding all the money they had defunded. But it's more than that. I also signed laws to protect law enforcement from dangerous rioters. I signed a law making it a felony for anyone to use fireworks or lasers to interfere with official police activity. When our nation saw a rise in targeted attacks on our law enforcement officers, I promised that we would protect our finest. And today, it is a hate crime to target a law enforcement official simply because of the uniform that they wear. And when the Biden administration opened our borders, putting an increased burden on our local law enforcement officers like the sheriff from Zapata County and some other counties who are represented here today, they're having to deal with the consequences of these open border policies. And that's exactly why I stepped up. You guys were overworked and understaffed. And that's why we provided you additional resources, but it's why we're also down there ourselves with the strongest border security effort ever by any state ever in the history of this entire country. We are, in addition to providing resources to local law enforcement, we're also adding our own law enforcement through the Texas Department of Public Safety and the National Guard to assist the local law enforcement as they address crime, as they address these smugglers coming across the border. And by the way, I signed a law this past session making it easier for prosecutors to actually prosecute the crime of human smuggling. We also passed a law to make it easier for these law enforcement officials to prosecute people for trafficking in fentanyl. Fentanyl is the most deadly drug that we see on the streets today. 2 tiny milligrams of fentanyl, two things smaller than a grain of salt, is a deadly dose. And we have seized more fentanyl in Texas than is enough to kill every man, woman, and child in Texas, California, Illinois, New York, and Florida combined. What's coming across the country is deadly, and the people who are in the front lines trying to stop that are the men and women you see in front of you and represented by those who are in front of you. Also, we wanted to make sure that we would crack down on the heinous crime of human trafficking. Today is Human Trafficking Awareness Day. I was talking actually with one of these sheriffs about what they are doing with regard to cracking down on human trafficking. We must eradicate this abuse, especially of women and children, many of whom, maybe most of whom, cross the border having been victimized by human trafficking. We will not stop until we eradicate human trafficking in Texas. That will not occur without all these law enforcement officers stepping up, assisting in that effort. The fact is, Texas is stronger when we support our law enforcement officers. I am running for re-election to ensure that no radical will ever defund law enforcement in Texas. I am running to make sure that the law enforcement officers in Texas receive the support they need to keep Texas safe. So thank you again for your endorsements. I look forward to working with you as we continue keeping Texas the land of the free and the home of the brave. Thank you all.
Thank you, Governor.
We'll take a few questions.
The hate crime, whatever you mentioned right now, is that an executive decision or is something that is going to be before the legislature?
It is a law that's already been passed by the state legislature that I have signed into law. It's something that, if you go back in time, you may remember the horrific shooting of police officers in downtown Dallas. And there were things like that going on in other parts of the country. And we said we're not going to allow that to happen again in Texas. And part of the many things that we did in response to the horrific shooting of the police officers in downtown Dallas was to pass this law, making it a hate crime to shoot or attack a law enforcement officer simply because of the uniform they wear.
One more, just a follow-up. Mr. Jeremy Payne was talking about the whatever is happening to law enforcement officials with COVID and some of them, losing their lives to that disease. Yesterday, we did the story where local authorities, namely the Berkeley Josh and the mayor, sent you a letter asking for additional resources for hospitals because they're being overrun. Are you going to respond to that, and can you respond right now to that?
Well, we've already responded. So what the state of Texas has already been doing, both through the Texas Department of Health Services as well as the Texas Division of Emergency Management, they are surging resources, supplies, as well as personnel to regions across the entire state of Texas. Marvin here is from El Paso. We first surged it to El Paso recently, to other parts of the state of Texas, whether it be San Antonio or other regions. We want to make sure that all regions are going to have the healthcare personnel that they need to be able to respond to this. But it's more than that, because I think you probably have also reported that we have advanced and opened up additional testing centers across the state to make it easier for people to be able to get COVID-19 tests.
You mentioned National Guard at the border. You mentioned National Guard stationed at the border. Can you talk about how concerned are you about these reports we've seen in recent weeks that they've had some problems with pay, there's been a number of suicides, reports of poor living conditions. How concerned have you been about those reports and what's being done to fix those issues?
Very importantly, both General Norris as well as General Eulis, General Norris is the Adjutant General for the National Guard. General Eulis is the general in charge of the Operation Lone Star Border Security Plan, as well as my team and myself. We stay in constant contact about all these things. Let me mention a couple that you mentioned. On the paycheck issue, listen, that was something that General Norris was involved with from the very beginning. When they added 10,000 National Guard to be involved in Operation Lone Star, it's my understanding there's been a total of 84 of those National Guard who've had a paycheck challenge. And the paycheck challenge, for the most part, was they were getting their paycheck at the end of the month as opposed to at the beginning of the month. And they just had to go through the paperwork process to get it done. All paycheck issues have been addressed. As it concerns suicide, first I'll tell you this, and that is, listen, as the commander-in-chief of our troops in the state of Texas, the life of every one of them is significant. The loss of any of them is extraordinarily hurtful. But to understand the context of all this, it's important to understand that anytime there's a suicide, there are investigations of it. And we'll see how it turns out, but I think you'll find not all the suicides, of which I hear there were 4 that were reported, actually occurred during Operation Lone Star. That said, we need to understand the larger context, because this is not, if you would, an isolated incident. Let me go over the numbers of just the months of July, August, and September of 2021, which is the third quarter of 2021. In the United States military, there were 163 suicides in those 3 months, 37 of whom concerned National Guard. for the first 9 months of last year, under the Biden administration, there were 476 suicides of United States military members. I point that out for a couple of reasons. First, to understand that what may or may not have happened in Operation Lone Star is not an isolated incident. But second, it is offensive for any of these people raising the issues to politicize the issue of a military member losing their life. If they are saying something about what's happening in the National Guard in Texas, why are they not at the very same time saying something about President Biden and having lost hundreds of members of the United States military losing their lives to suicide? Why are they silent about that? The answer, they're just playing politics. The life of a soldier, far more valuable than the words of a politician playing politics.
One more question.
Governor, I want to ask you, instead of customers for CPS paying a rate hike to make up for last year's winter storm, should CPS management take a pay cut?
So with CPS, to be honest, it's a little bit more complicated than some others. If I recall correctly, CPS was actively involved in the entire management of the grid also. And CPS, there are, put it this way, there's a lot of complexities involving CPS. And they're going to have to make their own decisions about what is the right pathway forward. Thank you.
Governor, you're surrounded by more than a message to.
Well, listen, I'm proud to be here at the Bexar County Sheriff's Association headquarters to be with the men and women who serve in the Bexar County Sheriff's Office and to be endorsed by the men and women who work in the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. Thank you.